All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm here today with John Gardner. John is an expert in American manufacturing and the author of Manufacture Local: How to Make America the Manufacturing Superpower of the World. With over 2 decades of experience, John offers a unique and insightful perspective on the critical link between national security and a strong domestic industrial base. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Lisa.
So share with us a little bit about what your background and what led you to doing what you do.
Yeah, I grew up around the manufacturing industry. My dad's was in it. All my relatives in Pittsburgh were in it. And my dad started a shop in our garage as a kid where he selling cutting inserts that he had a patent around. And I got a little exposure to working for him on an old World War II era carbide grinder. And I left home. I dropped out of high school and left Ohio and came out to California to get into acting because we grew up without a TV and a phone. My family was very religious. And I got hit by a car and was in a coma and had brain surgery, had a traumatic brain injury. And in the hospital, I got to watch movies because I lived at the library before that. So I got to see all these movies come to life. I'm like, wow, I want to be part of that, being storytelling. My head was all messed up and school was a struggle. So I just left home with a bag of books and a bag of clothes and luckily landed in Los Angeles with met a bunch of good people. And I realized I didn't like this industry. I didn't stand around on film sets. I didn't like just standing around a lot, waiting on shots to be set up. And I felt bored. So I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I felt like a failure. And I remember my dad had started this business back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I talked to him about, hey, what if I started a business? And so long story, I had a cutting tool that my dad designed that I borrowed money from a bartender's dad to get a patent on. So I started selling my own patented cutting tool out of my apartment at age 25 while I worked as a waiter and picked up other odd jobs to support this venture. And that's how I started it all. And in 2005, I started that. So 19 years later, I've learned so much because I talk directly to every aspect of the manufacturing industry, the shop owners, to accounting, to the machinists, the operators, engineers. And I saw a lot of problems with our domestic industrial base. And I wanted to put my voice out there for our industry, have them start to translate for the American people the importance of our industry and what we do.
Yeah. So that's so interesting. So leaving Ohio to go to California. So how, of all of those things, did those early experiences shape your perspective on manufacturing? You were in Hollywood, for goodness sake. What was the draw?
I realized that what I started off to do, get into film, I didn't like. And so
Okay.
I like the idea of independence. And that's the biggest thing about the manufacturing industry is there's 252,000 machine shops, manufacturing companies in America. 75% of them are 20 employees or less. And the industry of yesterday, where it was the big factories, has really gone to where you can start your own shop in a garage out in the countryside and start to make parts and sell them and do well. And I think it was the independence of business ownership, but also the heritage that I had. Probably I'm lucky to have seen that with my dad just starting a business in his own garage. And so I gravitated to that just luckily because I feel like manufacturing and making products is a heritage here in America that has been forgotten. And so many families can pass that knowledge on and get their kids jobs where they work or start their own shop. And I feel that our culture has forgotten our manufacturing heritage. So that kind of I was lucky in the fact that how I was raised and where I was raised at, driving past all these manufacturing companies probably informed my pathway a bit.
Interesting. So I know, and before the show, we were talking a little bit about changing the conversation about manufacturing to draw other people in. So what are you seeing right now as far as maybe companies that are doing it right, or how exactly we can expand that conversation?
That's one of the things I love about shows like yours is we're talking about what the benefits of manufacturing. When I was raised, it was just go to college, and you look at high school and education today, and it's all just go to college, and then you get college debt, and then you have to be an internship. But when you get out of high school, if you go straight in the manufacturing industry, you can start to earn and build out your skill sets. And there's a lot of high-paying manufacturing jobs today. But the companies that are doing it right are the ones that take in first of all, we need to get machine shop and manufacturing knowledge back in high school. It has to be a mandated thing. So kids design their own parts, 3D print prototypes, then make those prototypes in a shop and start to get the feel for what it takes to make a product and how that can later help them become business owners by knowing the basics of making a product. And that is not presented to our youth today in any manner. The only path suggested to our kids, for the most part, is to go to college. And I think if we get shop class back in school, starting as sophomores, and then teach them the basics of metalworking, woodworking, and design and CAD. But the companies that are doing it right, some of my vendors, they'll be told about a kid that's really bright in high school by the shop class teacher. And Florida has they have some high schools that have shop class. And then there's trade schools close to these high schools, which are marketing to the high schools, which then have kids that are really bright, that don't want to sit in a classroom for the next 4 years. They want to start making money and start their life. And they'll go into the trade schools. And I was at a vendor of mine in Coral Gables, Florida, and he was a bright kid named Brandon was identified after 4 months in a trade school, right out of high school. He was 19. He'd been at my vendor's company for 9 months. He was running 3 separate CNC machines. He was making about 60 grand a year base pay. He could work all the overtime he wanted because he was sharp. He knew CAD. He wanted to learn more. The company paid for him to take CAD design at night. And the kid was probably bringing home about 80 grand a year with all the overtime he was working at 19 years old with no debt. And then he was building skill sets that he could take to any company in the world: aerospace, automotive, agricultural production. Anything he wanted to do, he could go because he had this knowledge. And so I think we really need to embrace capturing these kids' attention when they're younger.
Oh, absolutely. And it is nice to see shop programs starting to come back. I think that they're starting to realize how necessary it was. It's like when I was growing up, I took metal shop and wood shop primarily because I didn't want to take home ec. But if they had all of that, and auto shop was there and everything else, and then it went away for a long time, and it's nice that it's starting to make a resurgence, because you're absolutely correct. We need it.
I talk a lot in the book about there's a shop class in a high school, I think in Iowa, where they actually have it as a business, and the kids make products and get a little bit of the money they make. Like for Christmas gifts, they make laser engraved like gifts for their family, like Christmas ornaments and stuff, and the kids sell them at the school shop. But beyond that, I grew up around Pittsburgh in the 80s and 90s, and I saw that city fall hard when manufacturing got sent overseas. And my heart breaks for the youth in these cities like Chicago and Detroit and Baltimore and Cleveland, where they used to have a middle class path that they could embrace if they wanted to. And now you look at these cities and the youth running around, and the options are very limited. There should be more on the life menu of choices for kids, and the manufacturing industry is not presented as one of those options. And you look at their options, it's be a rapper, be an athlete, join a gang, do really well in school while maybe your family's barely surviving poverty, and maybe you'll get a scholarship to maybe go to college and maybe get salaried later on. And we need to bring those middle-class jobs back, because the fastest way to the middle class historically around the globe, Germany climbed its way out of World War II, and Japan climbed their way out of World War II based on their ability to re-embrace industrialization. And so we need to bring those industrial jobs back so our youth have a middle-class path forward. For the first time on record in American history, in 2015, our census showed that middle-class Americans did not make up the majority of Americans. That means we're having a bigger gap between lower wage, lower income families and higher income families. And I attribute that 100% to the loss of our manufacturing base, because that was the path to the middle class.
Yeah, and this probably goes into the next question, but what are some of the specific risks that you see with America's current over-reliance on foreign manufacturing, and how have recent global events highlighted some of these vulnerabilities?
One recent global event was I think the Houthis attacking cargo ships in the Red Sea, going through the ships coming up through the Red Sea. National security is a major issue. And if we don't make our parts that go into our national security, we have a major problem. And Brigadier General, I think his name is John Adams, he did a whole report and he says, I quote, "Our America's over-reliance on foreign suppliers for goods that make up our defense industrial base is alarming, and America has a huge vulnerability. So if you look at the one constant in civilization, the history of civilization, is war, and nations need to prepare for that. And if a majority of our goods for a defense industrial base, we're not talking about the plastic toys for kids, we're talking about for a defense industrial base. If those are made in adversarial countries like communist China, or in India, which is surrounded by Iran and China, as we try to ship those goods to us, supply chains are the number one target at the start of any conflict. You look at World War II, when America would send Liberty ships full of goods to Great Britain to survive the Nazi advancement. Those Liberty ships were targeted by the Wolfpack submarines of Nazi Germany. And in today's day and age, with hypersonic missiles and increased submarine capability, we have centered our manufacturing capability and our ability to supply our defense industrial base right in the center of the new threat matrix of Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. That seems to be a very poor strategy for the survival of our nation and our independence. We look at COVID, when we couldn't get medical supplies from communist China because we just don't make them here anymore. So there's a massive problem. I think it's our economists and our elites and our academics all embrace unilateral free trade. And people get me wrong. I believe in free trade, just within America's borders. Why do I have a company in California, many clients in California, when they buy a $1,000 purchase order with me, a 10% tax is tacked on for the state of California. Me in California selling to a California company, they pay 10% more. Now, if that same company put in a $1,000 purchase order with communist China, they wouldn't pay any tax. How is that free trade? How is that beneficial for our nation? How does that encourage us to make our own goods and be independent of other nations? And no nation should be independent on other nations in the manner that America is today.
That's really interesting. You mentioned a couple of them, but are there other historical examples that you can use when you're talking about self-sufficiency in manufacturing and its impact on national security today?
Yeah, if you look back at the history of great powers, and when I say great powers, I think of like Great Britain, how they pretty much conquered the world, or you look at how Russia survived Great Britain did it through industrialization. They were the manufacturing powerhouse of the world back in the 1800s after they industrialized. And that allowed them to have the manufacturing power. Then Soviet Union survived the Nazi onslaught in the beginning of World War II by actually packing up all of their factories and moving them very far east behind the mountains to then be able to make the tanks, then come back and fight the Nazis later on in the war. So they survived because they moved their whole manufacturing capability. Right now, we don't have that manufacturing capability here in America anymore. Look at communist China. They're the number one manufacturer in the world. From 2000, you look at the year 2001, we gave them most favored nation status. They were not a military superpower in the world. You look now, a short 24 years later, they are militarizing the Indo-Pacific region aggressively. They're preparing for war. It's the largest military expansion of a nation since probably the beginning of World War II, when Germany and Japan built up their militaries. And so you look at what manufacturing capabilities has done for communist China. That's the most recent example, in my opinion. But you also look at how manufacturing stimulates economies. The Allies targeted specifically the industrial capabilities of Japan and Germany during World War II with our bombing, right? So we devastated their industrial bases, right? But then Germany and Japan are top 5 world economies today because they industrialized right after World War II and built up those specific sectors. They didn't become top 5 world economies because their human capital, their knowledge, was based in academics and accountants and lawyers. They became top 5 world economies only because Germany embraced manufacturing. So I think those are very good historical examples of how manufacturing capability builds great power. And we want America to be a great power because we want America to be a bastion of liberty and freedom for people to come. And if we can't make the goods our military needs, let alone the goods our citizens needs, we're a weak nation.
So I have had lots of people on my show talking about reshoring and bringing manufacturing back to America. Are you seeing that as a trend at all, and we just need to speed up the process? Or what are your thoughts on the efforts that we're making now?
I think it has started to happen. I think COVID was a big scare. The supply chain people, for the first time, realized the globalization model was shaky. I have a line in my book that says, international unilateral free trade only works in the absence of great power conflict. So the globalization business model does not work if there's conflict. You look at the Red Sea right now, the ships are having trouble getting through. I do think that it's starting to accelerate, but we need to put protective tariffs in place. Tariff is, I have a chapter in my book that says tariff is not a 4-letter word. For 140 years, the first 140 years of America's existence, there was no income tax, there was no sales tax, there wasn't this heavy tax burden on the citizen. America paid its bills in totality for the first 140 years. And then they decided to change the external revenue service that was created by our founding fathers and create the internal revenue service and target our citizens to fund our government. And a fascinating fact, the Coalition for Prosperous America has done numerous studies on the economic effects of tariffs. And they say for an average tariff rate of 15%, we could wipe out the $492 billion of income tax that the bottom 90% of Americans pay. And imagine if you did for 15%, that would protect our industries. And imagine if you gave all 90% of Americans their income tax back and they didn't pay it. Then that dollar would, then the argument on the free trader side is tariffs are a tax on Americans, not if you buy American. So then American manufacturers their goods are more affordable because the foreign goods are a little bit more expensive. And if our American dollar goes to an American manufacturer, that American manufacturer can pay an American citizen, and that dollar stays within our ecosystem. If you think about it right now, the dollar that you spend on Amazon to a Chinese company, that goes to the Chinese nation, a Chinese citizen that pays tax on that builds up the Chinese military. We are literally funding the rise of communist China's military with our own dollar. So I think that the biggest thing that can encourage a dramatic reshoring is tariffs, a reasonable tariff that will then put that dollar back in American citizens' hands. And there's so many things that we can do to encourage. Right now, websites like Amazon, if you go to a Walmart and you see a good, they're required to put made in USA or where it's made at. Online platforms are not required to say where a product is made from. I think there needs to be a requirement that there's a piece of legislation called the COOL Act, a Country of Origin Online Labeling Act. And they're trying to make it where these online vendors, which we all started to buy more and more online, have to say, hey, here, this product, people want to buy made in America. There's a study that says, I think 80% of Americans want to buy more made in America because they just struggle to find them. I also think how platforms like Amazon recommend products, I think they should be required to recommend a made in America option alongside of their other recommended options when they target people for, hey, you expressed interest in protein powder. Here's a protein powder. They give you the 5 recommendations. One of those should be a made in America option. And I think that the tariffs are a tool. Tariffs were used going back from our knowledge to the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi. We only recently started to pull down tariff walls. And you look at what tariffs did for our nation. We were able to win World War II based on our manufacturing power and how much we could produce. We supplied Great Britain, we supplied Soviet Union while they were able to withstand the initial onslaught of Nazi Germany. We were only able to do that because we could turn our civil manufacturing power to military manufacturing power. An example of that, a couple of examples are the Lionel Toy Train Company. They went from making toy trains to making compasses for warships. The Singer sewing machines. My wife has one from the 40s. Singer sewing machine went from making sewing machines to making bomb sights for planes. So if you don't have a civil manufacturing base, you can't turn that to military production in times of need. And so, sorry, I'm just rambling here, but I think the tariff tool is misunderstood, and I think that is if we get some tariffs in there, it'll cause a massive amount of reshoring. This is the most important point I want to make. Manufacturers need volume. They need economy of scale. It's so much cheaper to make 10,000 goods. The price per piece drops dramatically when you make 10,000 pieces as opposed to 100 pieces. And I know after 20 years in the industry, I'll have clients that will call me like, I got 40 pieces to make. Or I hear a lot, I got electric motor shaft. We got 1,000 parts made overseas, but they made them wrong. And it's cheaper to fix what was made wrong overseas rather than make the whole thing here. So tariffs will cause the volume work that then manufacturers can do and create economy of scale. A lot of times I'll read about these academics and economists writing about our industry, and America needs to embrace robotics and automation. Well, a manufacturer only invests in robotic cells if they have the volume to justify it. If they have 100,000 pieces, they're going to invest in a robotic cell. But if they have 100 pieces, not going to do it. And so the lack of tariffs encourage manufacturers to ship their stuff overseas because why not? It's cheaper right now. Another big thing on the tariff point is the moral obligation to manufacture in America. We fought a civil war to end slavery here. Everybody talks about the horrible slave history of America. It's awful. But then that moral obligation to end slavery and forced labor stops at our border in the name of free trade, because we all know our supply chain is permeated with goods made with forced labor overseas, and that goods made by people, by countries who do not have to follow the same labor laws and environmental laws that our companies do. How can we ever expect our companies to compete if we have to pay $40-50 an hour and healthcare and have environmental standards in place, and you can send it overseas and you get somebody working 18 hours a day, 6-7 days a week with no benefits? How can we compete unless we have tariffs in place?
Yeah, it's an interesting, I guess I never thought about that. So it's an interesting perspective to consider. So when it comes to the strategic vision, what do you propose? Is there something, I know we went over tariffs a lot, but for rebuilding America's industrial base, and especially when it comes to innovation and investment playing their roles in that vision?
Well, a very recent Defense Department study, which I put in my bibliography, shows that for every dollar invested in the manufacturing industry, it creates $2.76 in return, giving it the highest multiplying effect of any sector, higher than Silicon Valley, higher than any other sector in economy. The manufacturing industry has a higher return. Also, it shows that it supports 7 to 10 other jobs around it. You get a manufacturer that then has all these subcontractors, or you have a manufacturing employee that then has a higher wage than somebody working at Starbucks, and they go spend their dollar at the movie theater or at the grocery store. It has this ballooning effect, because the World Trade Organization on their website says manufactured goods make up 80% of the economy. A service economy only makes up 20% of global economy. So when I hear economists say, well, we're a service economy now and we're post-industrial, if you're a post-industrial economy, you're really a pre-industrial economy. You can't make the goods for your own nation. Why would any nation embrace 20% of global economy, the service economy, when they can embrace 80% of the economy? It doesn't make any sense. And back to your original question, what can we do to innovate? On that Defense Department study, they said that the manufacturing industry, investing in manufacturing industry, the manufacturing industry has the highest amount of patents filed and the highest amount of innovation rate. And it is a fantastic Defense Department study, which I note in my book. And what we need to do is have protective tariff walls. We also need to mine local and refine local. Raw materials are what make the manufacturing industry go around. We have offshored a lot of our mining, even though our mining sector is so much cleaner than other nations. A scary fact is that the average time it takes a mining company to get a permit in America is 7 to 10 years. Whereas in similar countries like Canada and Australia that have similarly strong environmental laws, similarly strong environmental consciousness, it only takes 2 years. Why? Why? And so then you think you mine all this ore over in China or in India, and then you process it over there, and then you have to ship it here. We don't have the raw materials I go into this in depth in my book of the 55 critical minerals, like 30 of them we are completely reliant on other nations for. If we went to war right now, World War II was fought and won in 4 years. We wouldn't even begin to be ready to start making our own goods for 5 to 10 years. And starting with the raw materials and rebuilding our raw material capabilities here domestically is a very big first step to get cheaper raw steel, raw titanium, aluminum here close for manufacturers to buy from. There's also that hidden cost of when you ship from overseas, there's all these middlemen that tack on costs. So when we mine here, there can be less middlemen that add in a lot of costs. So
we're starting to get to the end of our time together. So given your journey from adversity to building a successful business, now what are some of the advices that you would offer to aspiring entrepreneurs who are thinking about doing the same thing you did in the manufacturing industry?
I think talking to your clients, so many people just want to make their product and have it happen online. But I learn most of what I know from talking to my clients every day, tens of thousands of hours. You learn so much from the word of mouth of the guy running the machine. You learn from your vendors and suppliers, and it takes a lot of effort and time. but it's so much more. I was able to adjust quickly by feedback from my clients and vendors. Staying in constant communication with them, visiting them in person has been invaluable. It sounds almost like a no-brainer, but You think that with today's tools of online, sell through Shopify or sell through this online platform, or the thing that set me apart as a cutting tool manufacturer is I was able to, most cutting tool manufacturers sell through distributors and they don't talk to their end users. I said, I'm not going through distributors. I'm selling straight to my clients. And that, I think, gave me the edge I sell one product. And I compete with multinational global corporations, and I do better than them according to my clients because I'm much faster, much more responsive. So that has been, I think, one of the things that helped me the most is constant communication with my clients and vendors.
Mm. Okay, so if somebody did want to get a copy of your book and also continue the conversation with you, how can they get the book and how can they find you?
So Manufacture Local is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, bookshop.org. If they just Google Manufacture Local by John Gardner, it'll come up. And my email is johngauthor, JOHNG, author, AHTHOR, @gmail.com, johngauthor@gmail.com. And one last note, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to say, if you want to start a business in the manufacturing industry, start learning in school, start learning at night how to do AutoCAD, get in a shop and you'll see a need. My cutting tool was invented by my ex-girlfriend's dad. He didn't invent it, but he saw a need. He said, hey, if I had a tool that could do this, because everybody that wants to sit behind a desk, they're not hands-on. And they don't see the need because they're just getting drawings. But if you get involved, you'll suddenly see a need. Hey, I have a friend of mine who saw a need for a certain type of a coolant monitoring system. He built a business around it because he was working on machines. Man, this is bugging me. My coolant's not doing this. What if I invented something that could do what I want it to do? So get involved hands-on. Spend 5 years learning the industry and you will see a need and you'll be able to build your own business based on around that. And today's tool, it's never been easier to start your own business with all the tools online available to us.
Yep. And now all we have to do is get the schools to buy in and the parents and the guidance counselors to start directing kids to these types of careers.
And that's what we want. Today's youth really need to be presented the industry of today, where it's clean room and AI and interconnectivity, machines talk to each other. Everything's so high tech and clean in the manufacturing industry compared to how we look at the manufacturing industry of yesteryear. So,
right. Absolutely. John, it's been fascinating having you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Lisa, thank you so much for having me. Sorry if I rambled on too much.
Oh, that's all right. I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community we'll all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.